As you move more and more in a spiritual direction, the things that are not meant for you automatically fall. In the spiritual unfolding of a human life, there comes a quiet yet unmistakable realization. As you begin to move more deeply in a spiritual direction, the things that are not meant for you automatically fall away. This is not because you force them out, reject them in bitterness, or consciously decide that they are unworthy of your presence. Rather, they dissolve naturally like shadows retreating before the rising sun, because your inner frequency no longer resonates with them. Spiritual growth is less about acquiring something new and more about remembering what has always been true within you. It is not a process of becoming but of unbecoming. You begin to shed illusions, attachments, false identities, and inherited fears that you once believed were essential to your survival or happiness. The roles you played, the relationships you clung to, the ambitions you chased, and even the pain you identified with, these begin to loosen their grip as your awareness expands. What once felt necessary may begin to feel heavy. What once felt meaningful may begin to feel empty. What once defined you may begin to dissolve into silence. This can be both liberating and frightening. The spiritual path does not always begin with light. Often it begins with discomfort, a growing sense that something in your life is misaligned. The conversations you once enjoyed begin to feel shallow. The environments that once energized you begin to drain you. The goals that once motivated you begin to seem hollow. It is not that these things are inherently wrong, they are simply no longer aligned with the truth you are beginning to recognize within yourself. As your consciousness expands, your tolerance for illusion decreases. You may notice that certain relationships begin to change or fade. People you once felt deeply connected to may no longer understand your silence, your introspection, or your need for solitude. Some may interpret your growth as distance. Others may feel threatened by the changes they cannot name. But spiritual evolution often requires a recalibration of the company you keep. Not because you are becoming superior, but because you are becoming sincere. Inauthenticity becomes unbearable to a soul that is waking up. This process is not always graceful. Letting go rarely feels like a celebration in the moment. There may be grief, there may be confusion, there may be moments when you wonder if you are losing something essential. The ego, which has spent a lifetime building attachments for the sake of security, will resist this shedding. It will attempt to convince you that you need to hold on, that you cannot survive without what is falling away. But what is truly meant for you does not require force. In fact, one of the most profound spiritual truths is this: what belongs in your life will not need to be chased, manipulated, or controlled into staying. As you align more deeply with your inner truth through stillness, awareness, compassion, and presence, you begin to attract experiences, people, and opportunities that mirror that alignment. The spiritual journey is not about grasping more tightly, but about opening more fully. You do not lose what is real by growing. You only lose what was never truly aligned with your essence. Habits that once numbed your pain may fall away because you no longer need to escape from yourself. Patterns of self-doubt may dissolve because you begin to see your worth as inherent rather than conditional. External validations may lose their power because your sense of identity is no longer rooted in approval. Even your fears, those ancient protectors of your ego, may begin to soften as you realize that your being is not defined by the outcomes you once tried to control. This is why spiritual transformation often appears from the outside as loss. You may lose interest in certain pursuits. You may lose friendships that were built on mutual avoidance rather than mutual truth. You may lose the urgency to prove yourself in a world that once measured your value by achievement or status. You may even lose the version of yourself that you spent years trying to perfect. but in truth, you are not losing anything of value. You are simply making space, and as space is created, something else begins to emerge, not through effort, but through allowance. Peace begins to take the place of anxiety. Clarity begins to replace confusion. Love begins to flow where fear once dominated. The silence that once felt lonely becomes sacred. The uncertainty that once frightened you becomes a doorway to possibility. Spiritual direction is not about escaping the world. It is about seeing it more clearly. It is about recognizing what nourishes your soul and what merely distracts it. As this recognition deepens, your life begins to reorganize itself around authenticity rather than obligation. Things fall away not as punishment, but as preparation. When you cling to what is no longer aligned, you delay the arrival of what is. But when you trust the intelligence of your own unfolding, when you allow the shedding to happen without resistance, you begin to notice that what remains is simpler, truer, and more alive. Your path becomes less crowded, but more meaningful. You may find yourself drawn to stillness rather than stimulation, to presence rather than performance, to connection rather than validation. The noise of comparison begins to fade. The need to control begins to loosen. The compulsion to chase begins to dissolve. And in that dissolution, you discover something remarkable. Life begins to meet you where you are, rather than where you pretend to be. As you move more deeply in a spiritual direction, you become less concerned with accumulation and more concerned with alignment. Success is no longer defined by what you can hold on to, but by what you can release. Fulfillment is no longer found in possession but in presence. And so the things that are not meant for you, whether they be beliefs, behaviors, relationships, or ambitions, do not need to be violently removed. They simply lose their relevance. They fall away as naturally as leaves in autumn, making room for the quiet blossoming of what was always waiting beneath. In this way, the spiritual journey is a continuous process of refinement, not by addition but by subtraction, not by striving but by surrender. And as you surrender more fully to the truth of who you are, you come to understand that what remains after everything unnecessary has fallen away is not emptiness, but essence. What remains is you.